This is his life, but his short legs could not match the monster's long strides. The monster took a quick step and knocked him unconscious in one blow. Seeing a human for the first time, the monster bent down and stared at him closely. Just as it was about to pick him up and take him away, the captain charged forward with his sword and thrust it with full force into the monster's heel. The monster screamed in pain and turned around, but in the next instant, it lightly kicked the captain, sending him flying far away. Then it pulled the sword out of its heel and picked up both soldiers to eat them. Jack, standing at a distance, watched everything. At that moment, he realized what a huge mistake he had made by coming there. Actually, some time ago, Jack had received several magical beans with the help of a priest, but as soon as his girlfriend, who was a princess, came to meet him, one of those beans came into contact with water and began growing rapidly. The entire wooden house started shaking violently, and strange, terrifying sounds came from below. Both of them were so scared that they could not even move. Suddenly, the ground split open, and a giant beanstalk burst through the house and shoot straight towards the sky. Seeing this, the princess immediately tried to run, but a table fell on top of her. Jack rushed forward to save her, but the beanstalk flung him out of the house. At that exact moment, a wooden door suddenly opened, showing the princess a way out. But just as she tried to run outside, the beanstalk suddenly closed the door. The princess struggled to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Seeing this, Jack quickly picked up an axe to cut the beanstalks, but suddenly, the entire house, along with its roots, began rising towards the sky. At the very last moment, Jack jumped and grabbed the edge. However, the beanstalks were growing so fast that within seconds, the house reached thousands of meters in the air. Jack swung the axe with all his strength, trying to cut the beanstalk. As soon as it broke, the princess quickly opened the door, but the very next moment, the floor beneath her feet gave way, and despite Jack trying to grab her hand, she began falling from a height of 10,000 meters. Jack slid down the magical beanstalk towards the ground. The beanstalk slowed his speed a little along the way, and finally, he hit the ground and fell unconscious. But the princess was not so lucky, because the beanstalk carried her all the way to the other side of the sky. The next morning, Jack woke up in panic and saw the king standing in front of him, searching for the princess. Jack's senses left him, and out of compulsion, he told the king the entire story. When Jack pointed towards the sky, everyone saw a giant beanstalk shooting straight up into the heavens. As soon as the king learned the truth, without wasting a single moment, he sent a team of soldiers. Seeing such great height, Jack's condition worsened. While sliding in the middle, his hands suddenly slipped and he fell straight down. Luckily, the beanstalks caught him midway. As soon as he regained consciousness, he began climbing up again without stopping. When they reached the top, the weather had completely changed. There was a fierce storm and crackling lightning all around. Suddenly, a powerful bolt of lightning struck one soldier directly. He slipped, and the other soldiers collided with him and began falling down. But at the last moment, one soldier grabbed the rope tightly, which somehow saved the lives of the remaining people. However, the soldiers who had fallen were now hanging in the air. If they were not pulled up immediately, the entire team would be in danger. Then Rhetoric told the man standing next to him to cut the rope. The man liked the idea and immediately pulled out a knife hidden in his boot. The hanging soldiers begged him not to do it, but without showing any mercy, he cut the rope and the soldiers fell from a height of 10,000 feet. Somehow, the remaining soldiers reached the top, and by then, morning had also arrived. When Jack turned around and looked, he was completely stunned because there was a giant world above the clouds. Seeing this sight, everyone began moving in that direction. Then, the captain noticed fresh footprints on the ground and realized that the princess had not come down, but was somewhere here. When everyone came out of the cave, the captain was stunned by the scene in front of him because this world was far bigger than they had hoped. Everyone moved forward and began exploring the area. Then, their eyes fell on the branches of the trees. They found marks left by the princess there. Meanwhile, Jack also found the same book on the ground that he had given to the princess. Then their eyes fell on the broken twigs, from which they realized that some dangerous creature had picked up the princess and taken her away. After that, all of them divided into two teams and set out in different directions to search for the princess. On the way, Jack and his companions reached near a stream, where they saw a herd of fat, healthy sheep. Being hungry for many days, they decided to cook one sheep. But as soon as they tried to catch the sheep, a nearby trap accidentally activated. Jack immediately took out his knife and began cutting the net with full force. The captain was also trying to cut the rope, but then his eyes fell on something strange. All the crows nearby suddenly flew away in panic, and all the sheep began running in the opposite direction together. The captain felt suspicious, but continued cutting the rope. Somehow, both of them managed to get out of the trap, but then a terrifying sound echoed from the jungle, and the very next moment, a gigantic monster appeared in front of them and picked up both soldiers and took them away. Jack quietly followed the monster, so the princess in a cage. Then it took her to the other monsters, where all the monsters gathered and stared at her. Then the monster that had caught the captain and the fat soldier also returned. It threw both of them near the cage. Seeing this, the two-headed monster became suspicious that there might be more humans around. So it picked up the fat soldier lying on the ground, twisted his neck, and swallowed him alive. After that, the monster spat out his bones. But just as the monster threatened the captain that it would eat the princess too, a voice came from nearby that drew everyone's attention. It was none other than the treacherous Redrick's voice. Seeing the crown on his head, all the other monsters immediately fell to their knees. At that moment, Redrick's real plan was revealed to everyone. The monster was still busy, and in the meantime, Jack slowly approached the princess. He tried to open the lock of the cage, but it was beyond his power. Then, the princess told him to first save the captain, whom the monster had placed in line with the pigs. Jack immediately went to him and took out his knife to free him from the sticky dough. At that moment, the monster started coming back with spices. Seeing this, Jack quickly handed the knife to the captain and hid himself. Luckily, the monster did not suspect anything. It picked up some sharp sticks and inserted them into the eyes of the pig lying nearby, which immediately stopped squealing. Now, it was the captain's turn. The monster struck without mercy, hurting it, sent by Redrick. Then, an idea came to Jack's mind. He picked up a beehive and slowly approached the monster along with the captain. Then, the captain lifted the monster's helmet and Jack threw the beehive inside it. The monster was still sleeping carelessly and had no idea what was about to happen to it. As soon as Jack placed the beehive inside, the captain quickly closed the helmet. Then, both of them ran and hid behind a nearby rock and waited. After a short while, the monster woke up writhing from the bee stings and began shaking its body in pain. The more it struggled, the more the bees attacked it. In panic, the monster tried to run away, but slipped and crashed into the rocks, then rolled all the way to the edge of the cliff. It looked like it was about to fall. Then suddenly, it removed its helmet. Seeing this, all three were startled for a moment, but then a bee flew straight towards it and stung it hard, causing it to lose control and fall straight down. Seeing this, all three jumped with joy. They could not believe they had defeated such a big monster so easily. After that, the three decided to leave immediately, but suddenly the captain stopped. He said the monster that had collided with a beanstalk finally fell to the ground. Hearing the loud sound, the king immediately came out of his tent and got scared seeing the dangerous monster. Suddenly, the villagers also gathered there. Then, the king, for the sake of his people's welfare and to stop the monsters from coming here, made a big decision against his will. He immediately ordered the general to cut down the beanstalk. The soldiers hammered huge iron nails into the giant beanstalk. Then they attached strong hooks to them and began pulling it with the help of some beanstalks and horses. Slowly, the giant beanstalk started shaking from its roots, but the soldier standing nearby suddenly came into danger. Then suddenly, the thick middle beanstalk also began to break. The soldier standing above started falling, causing chaos all around. Meanwhile, Jack and the princess were descending with the help of the beanstalk, but as soon as they looked down, they panicked in fear because the beanstalk had gone out of control and could fall at any moment. At that time, Jack saw the opportunity, held the princess tightly, and quickly grabbed a hanging vine. Both of them swung in the air and moved rapidly downward. Finally, when they fell, a pile of grass reduced their speed, and thus both reached the ground safely. At that exact moment, Redrick gathered all the monsters and prepared to attack the humans. Then, the two-headed monsters sensed the presence of a human, from which the captain hid. Then, Redrick moved forward and took out the magical beans for growing beanstalks, but suddenly, the captain attacked him, causing the magical beans to drop on the rock, and Redrick fell straight into the pit below. Redrick called out to the monsters in fear, while the captain was in and Redrick below. Redrick knocked the captain down with his long sword, and his weapon fell far away. Then, he began attacking continuously, but the captain somehow blocked his blow, and a contest of strength began between them. Soon, the captain started getting weaker, and Redrick pushed him into the water. Then suddenly, his eyes fell on the knife that was floating towards him. The captain grabbed it with his teeth at the right moment, and immediately struck Redrick in the face. The sudden attack made Redrick furious. He pushed the captain back with his weapon. The captain retreated reluctantly, and finally reached the edge. Then, Redrick kicked him hard and knocked him down, but the captain somehow grabbed the rocks. Redrick began stabbing the sword into his hands so that he would fall himself, but he had underestimated the captain's strength. Just as he attacked again, the captain grabbed his weapon and stabbed it into Redrick's leg. Redrick screamed loudly in pain, and taking advantage of the moment, the captain stabbed the sword into Redrick's stomach. Due to the sudden attack, Redrick died on the spot. With his death, the magical power of the crown also ended. The captain somehow climbed up and moved forward to take back the crown, but then the cave above broke, and the two-headed monster had already picked up the crown. It put the crown on his finger, and he could break and fall at any moment, so without delay, he jumped straight onto the beanstalk. The beanstalk moved rapidly towards the castle. The captain took advantage of the right time and jumped straight into the water. When the two-headed monster saw that the path to the human world had been broken, it roared in anger. Then, suddenly, the smaller head pointed toward the bag lying on the ground that contained the magical beans. The two-headed monster picked it up and opened it in his hand. There were 4 magical beans in total. Seeing this, it threw the beans into the water. As soon as the beans touched the water, they began to grow, and the very next moment, 4 giant beanstalks burst out, tearing through the ground. After that, the two-headed monster gave a loud command, and all the monsters climbed onto the beanstalks and began moving towards the human world. In the last moment, the two-headed monster also jumped and came down. It slid down the beanstalks towards the ground. At the same time, Jack was watering his horse. Suddenly, his eyes went towards the sky. He saw that all the monsters were rapidly descending. Without wasting a moment, he mounted his horse and set out to warn the king. Meanwhile, the king's army was calmly moving towards the castle. Then, Jack spotted the army. He started shouting loudly that the monsters were coming, but the king still did not understand anything. Then, suddenly, many monsters emerged from the forest behind and destroyed everything wherever they went. No one could stop them. Soon, the monster army came close and picked up one soldier and swallowed him alive. People riding horses could not escape their speed either. At that time, humans were completely helpless in front of them. Then, a round-faced monster broke the fan of a nearby windmill and threw it towards the princess, which shattered everything upon hitting the ground, and the king's crown also fell. Meanwhile, the soldiers stationed at the castle saw the king's army approaching and immediately sent news to prepare for battle inside. The captain immediately ordered the soldiers to pour oil into the moat to stop the enemies. As soon as the king's army reached near the castle, he ordered to shoot arrows, and in no time, hundreds of burning arrows were released toward the enemies. As soon as these arrows hit the oil, fire blazed all around, and in the meantime, the king's army safely reached inside the castle. Seeing the princess safe and sound, the captain immediately ordered the castle gates to be closed, but at that time, Jack was still outside and the monsters were chasing him. Just as the castle gate was about to close, Jack panicked, but at the last moment, he jumped along with his horse and entered inside. However, right behind him, the two-headed monster also climbed onto the gate, but then the captain attacked it and it fell straight into the blazing flames. Soon, the fire completely engulfed it, but the surprising thing was that its own people did not come to save it and just stood there watching it burn. Meanwhile, people were still talking among themselves when suddenly a large iron bell came flying rapidly from the sky towards the castle. It smashed through the wall and fell straight down. Before anyone could understand anything, the war horn suddenly sounded. Then, two large iron hooks were thrown towards the castle gates, which the monsters began pulling with full force. A tug of war began between the humans and the monsters. Actually, this was all the plan of the round-faced monster, which called even more monsters and ordered them to break the castle gate. The atmosphere inside, but suddenly, a loud roar and cracks appearing in the ground drew their attention. Both stepped back in fear, and some stones flew upwards. Suddenly, two giant hands emerged from below. It was the same two-headed monster that had survived falling into the fire earlier because it was underwater and the fire could not harm it. It had quietly entered the castle through the sewer. Suddenly, it sensed the royal scent of the princess. Jack fearfully opened the blanket and saw that the monster had not noticed them yet. But then, in anger, the monster smashed the nearby glass. Both people hiding under the blanket began trembling in panic, but the monster looked straight at them. Jack gathered all his strength and immediately grabbed the princess and ran, but the monster kept chasing them continuously. With no way out, both ran towards the second floor. They did not even dare to stop their steps, but suddenly, a hand came out from the side and grabbed the princess. Jack picked up the axe lying nearby and attacked it without delay, but the monster caught him with his other hand. The smaller head began mocking Jack. Then, Jack, in anger, struck the axe straight and broke his helmet. In rage, the monster opened its large mouth. Then, Jack took out the magical bean hidden in his locket and threw it straight into its stomach. The two-headed monster suddenly felt something strange and immediately threw both of them to the ground. Then, suddenly, a beanstalk came out of its body and both stepped back in fear. Suddenly, many beanstalks burst out at full speed, tearing through its body, completely destroying the hall. Suddenly, the king's crowned hand also fell near Jack. Meanwhile, the outer soldiers were still busy stopping the monsters, but on a single command from the round-faced monster, all the monsters slowly moved forward, knocking down the soldiers one by one. The castle gate slowly opened. The captain immediately told the soldiers to close the iron door. At that exact moment, the round-faced monster came out slowly from the dust along with his companions, but the iron door could not stop it for long, and with one jerk, it broke the door. Then, that monster entered the castle along with his companions. Seeing the tasty-looking soldiers standing there, they became very happy. The monsters were about to attack when suddenly a voice came from behind, and all the monsters' attention went to that voice. The monster looked carefully into the crowd and suddenly dropped his weapon. Seeing this, the other monsters also dropped their weapons and knelt down in front of all the humans. The captain was stunned seeing this scene.